Now, state governors are up in arms against the federal government over President Muhammadu Buhari's assent to the Petroleum Industry Act, which they say does not take care of the interest of state governments and leaves them without a say in the new NNPC that will emerge. Let's deepen this discussion now on the Petroleum Industry Act as the chairman of Nigeria's Governors Forum and Ekiti Governor, Kayode Fayemi, joins us now. Governor, good to have you join us. Okay, let me take it from...
Good afternoon, Ekene.
Oh, a pleasure. Let me take it from here. We heard from one stakeholder, specifically Orji Obunaya Orji, saying that the inability to aggregate interests has held Nigeria down for 18 years. And he says the only way not to step on toes is to stand still. So at least before we even begin asking you what the governors are upset about, should we not commend the president for stepping ahead where others have failed to do so?
In fact, that's why I take exception to your point about governors being up in arms against the president. No, we're not up in arms against the president. As a matter of fact, we have commended these major developments in our country because it's something that has been on the cards for as long as this democracy has been on, and we've not succeeded in doing it. So kudos to the president for finally working with the National Assembly to get the Petroleum Industry Act in place. However, we also believe that whatever we're doing should be done in accordance with the Constitution so that we do not have to blame ourselves. The issues that governors are concerned about and which we made clear to the National Assembly when this bill was in the process of becoming an act relate to ownership structure and to questions of accountability and transparency so that at the end of the day, we don't subvert the original intention behind the Petroleum Industries Act. That's essentially the issue in relation to the concerns that have been raised by governors. And when the National Assembly did not reflect our concerns in the eventual harmonized bill that went for assent, we then wrote to the president to delay assent until we're able to deal with this. But thankfully, the minister has gotten back to us and has also acknowledged the concerns that had been raised and has said that some of those things can be handled in the amendments. And we're not averse to that, as long as there's an acknowledgement that what the governors are saying are things that really are in order and things that would help improve the investment climate as far as the Petroleum Industries Act is concerned. We don't have a problem with the act that has been signed into law. We would have, of course, been happier if at least a member of the implementation committee put in place yesterday by the president represent the subnationals. That way, it would have also built more confidence in the system.
Thank you very much, Governor. Now, let's look at another issue that has pitted the states against the federal government. Now, let's talk about the disagreement about the 1.8 trillion naira recovered loot and the 450 billion in assets. What's the breakdown of that dialogue, and how can they resolve this issue? What are your thoughts on that?
Again, governors believe that our president is a stickler for the rule of law and due process. And sometimes he doesn't get a comprehensive advice from those who are the technical people in charge of some of these issues. When the matter around recovered loot came up, we communicated with the Honorable Attorney General of the Federation and raised our concerns about the source of the money that was allegedly looted anyway, which in our view was from the Federation account. It wasn't federal government money. So when you want to return the loot, you cannot just say you are returning to the federal government and the federal government decides to do whatever it chooses to do with it. We would have preferred a situation in which the funds are returned to the federation account, and whatever the government chooses to do with it, there are mechanisms in government that would allow governors to also partake in that discussion. That's why we have the National Economic Council, where we are members, and the vice president is the chair of the National Economic Council, and we take collective decisions on issues that are germane to both the federal and subnationals. And that's all we were pleading for. It wasn't a case of being averse to whatever the government has chosen to do with the recovered loot. But we felt you cannot take a decision on it without our input as critical actors in the federation.
Okay, let's look into what your specific concerns are. I know you say you've been, to some extent, placated by assurances that an amendment would follow. But some of the things we hear you are concerned about is that your opinions were not even taken on board, even with regards to NMPC. So in that respect, has the horse not bolted? And then are you also going to be raising the issue you raised when you gathered together one of your gatherings of the Southern governors about the 3% being allocated to host communities?
Well, I don't speak for Southern governors. I don't know what Southern governors would discuss when they gather. What is of primary concern to me and the people I speak for is the entire forum of Nigerian governors. And this is a matter that the entire forum has discussed extensively, and we have come to certain conclusions about what is called frontier funds, whether it is 3% or not. For us, our concern there is that whatever you are taking into these places is a depletion from the federation account. That money will not go to the federation account. It would be spread across the few areas that you described as frontier basins, rather than to the entire federation. And we worry more about the entire federation, not about selective parts of the federation.
Sorry if I may interject. Does it make any difference that they say 30% is 30% of profits, which may or may not be realized, as opposed to 3% of operational costs, which is a definite amount, and some are equating it to $500 million?
For us as governors, that is a distinction without a difference. We are talking about depletion from the federation account. Whether it is 3% or 30%, it is money that should come to federation account that should then be subjected to fair and equitable distribution on extant principles of sharing, rather than one that is going to be at the whims and caprices of this new limited company that governors are not part of.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for that, Governor. So what then are the options for the governors, since there's apparently a new regime in the oil and gas industry now with this oil bill?
We encourage that new regime. We applaud what has happened. We have no problem with the PI Act. It's not a bill anymore, the Petroleum Industry Act, because it's something that many of us have been very, very concerned about. We see the depletion of interest in the oil industry. We see how many of the multinationals are voting with their feet and leaving the sector. And we believe that this would at least guarantee a level of reinvestment back into the oil industry. So on that account, it's worthy of kudos to all the players in this. Our issue is this corporation belongs to the federation. It does not belong to the federal government of Nigeria. And if it belongs to the Federation of Nigeria, then you must take into account what 46% of that federation is saying as subnationals, vis-a-vis what the 52% that the federal government is saying. It's a very simple argument. It's not complicated at all. And if a company must represent, our suggestion was that we jointly own the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority with the federal government of Nigeria, and that this company can be warehoused under the auspices of NSIA in terms of the shares belonging to the our partners, rather than in Ministry of Finance Incorporated, which is really a vehicle for the federal government of Nigeria, not for the Federation.
Okay, interesting. I mean, some might say that this is another, if those who are suspicious might say, by stealth, you're reinstituting a monopoly to the federal government, but we'll wait and see. And I just wanted to say that issues concerning remittance to the Federation accounts and equitable distribution of the same are issues that everyone is concerned about. So going forward, since you're waiting to see what these amendments will look like in response to the issues raised by the governors, how long will you wait? Because some are recommending that you may have to go to court if things don't work out the way you've anticipated.
It's not everything that we have to resort to court to resolve for constitutional interpretation. We only do that when all options have been exhausted and we haven't secured a reprieve. On this particular instance, we will work with the implementation committee, and if there's any reason for us to take an alternative measures, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But at least having acknowledged that these issues can be resolved in some way, shape, or form, as we're proposing, we will wait and see before we take any further step.
Okay.
I beg your pardon? I didn't quite get that question.
I was talking about the 50 billion worth of investments that were lost in the 10 years that the president has been discussing. Are we just not passing the blame from one to another? Is that something fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. I think the president was right to have said that, and I applaud his courage for going ahead with this and ensuring that this is signed. I am not a player in that industry, but I have friends in that industry. I know, for example, that Shell has been offloading assets in the industry. I know that ExxonMobil has been offloading assets and going to places like Guyana, where they're getting into the petroleum sector, because the laws are clearly defined. The penalties are also clear. The go-to people are clear, unlike our own opaque environment, which has really discouraged investment to the sector. So I also believe that the 50 billion that would have come in by Mr. President's assessment, which I believe would have been based on informed analysis of experts in the sector, is something that we can quickly recover from if we do the right thing and we let the industry operate without encumbrances, without all of the Nigerian factor that people talk about and the things that constitute impediments to the sector.
Okay, let's speak generally about how the governors have been acting in unison. I know you say you don't speak for the southern governors, but many were excited when the southern governors stood up to represent what they felt were their demands. Are we likely to see more of this? Because the separation of powers is an area we don't necessarily see playing out in our democracy. So what are the plans of the governors to stand up for the people's needs with regards to things like insecurity and other matters that are pressing on the polity at this time, including unemployment and so forth?
Well, governors, first and foremost, have responsibility within the jurisdiction where they've been elected into office. And they owe the people who elected them to office to meet the pledges and promises they made to them, either in terms of security or education or healthcare, or you name it. But governors also have to work in partnership and collaboration with the federal government, especially with a president that has been very supportive of states. Remember, here was the president, against all odds, who made bailout available for states to pay salaries, who made Paris Club refund available, which every single president before him refused to do, who has always met us at our point of need in states. And he has not put partisanship into this, whether it is infrastructure refund or Paris Club refund or bailout to states or budget support. He's made it available to all states, regardless of their partisan affiliation. So I think collaboration and cooperation for us is more of the way to go than contestation. You very rarely see us go to courts to resolve issues. When we do it on behalf of the Constitution, not in opposition or in confrontation with the federal government. And that's what you can still look forward to. In matters that we consider to be of fundamental importance to respecting the constitution of the land, we will be doing even the president and the federal government a favor by ensuring that these issues are clarified so that everybody knows where they stand on those issues. And that's why we don't hesitate. When there is need for it, we go and seek such clarification in the Supreme Court. But more often than not, we meet and we discuss with the president and we arrive at joint solutions of many of these issues.
Okay, so one last question, Governor. What's your take on no work or no work, no pay, no pay, no work? They're talking about the doctors who are on strike. They're saying that they haven't been paid, is it about 19 months worth of a salary in the state? What's your position on that?
Madam, I think you're confusing issues. Lack of payment for 19 months is not the same as the labor law with respect to no work, no pay. And I think that refers to the strike action, not to the backlog of salaries that are owed some doctors in some states.
Yeah, may I clarify?
I think all of us should focus.
May I seek to clarify things?
Please do.
Some have said that the labor law is happy to say no work, no pay for doctors. But what has happened to doctors who have worked without pay, in some states with as much as a 19-month backlog? So it's the inequity of the situation that's being projected here.
Well, I'm not a labor expert, Ekene. I'm sure you know that.
It's because you represent the states. That's why.
Yes, I do represent the state. And as a matter of fact, the strike issue in relation to the Association of Resident Doctors is one item on the agenda of the Governors Forum at our next meeting. And it is an issue that we have intervened in before now, and we have engaged states where there's been backlog of salaries to resident doctors. And we've been constantly involved in this. And what I would urge is that you still allow us not to talk about evoking laws and labor principles and procedures, and focus more on how to resolve this current issue at hand.
Okay, we appreciate your approach to things. Let's hope we see the dividends of that approach. Thank you, Governor Fayemi, Chairman of the Nigerian Governors Forum. Thank you for being a part of Newsday. Okay, and how hopeful are you? I don't mean to stir the hornet's nest here, but how hopeful are you, considering that 6 days before the presidential assent was granted, you expressed your concerns, and yet it didn't seem to be part of the considerations that were, that affected the president going forward to sign the Petroleum Industry Act, as it's known now?
Well, in fairness, I'm not even sure Mr. President saw that letter. Remember, it was out of the country. So officials in his office might have dealt with the communication from the governors without necessarily sharing it with him. I don't have the details. I don't know what transpired in his office. But all I knew was that the Honorable Minister of State reached out to me to indicate that, look, the letter was forwarded to him, and he believes that we could find a way to resolve the issues contained therein. So I don't want to blame the president for what he may or may not have even seen. The important thing is the official who is the driver of this, who is the chairman of the implementation committee, has reached out to the governors. He himself, as a former governor, he knows the place that subnationals occupy in the framework of Nigeria's federalism. And I don't believe he will shirk his duty in ensuring that we treat every player fairly and equitably.
All right. And speaking of the governors, where do the Nigerian Governors Forum stand on the judgment of the Federal High Court? In Port Harcourt, they were talking about collecting VAT, all the states collecting VAT, and not the federal government. Or is it just going to be the agents?
Well, we haven't discussed that yet. One of us went to court, and if it strengthens the principle of federalism, surely you can assume that governors will be supportive. But I don't speak for governors unless they've asked me to speak for them. And this is a matter that is on the agenda of our next meeting. So we certainly would discuss it, and I'll be in a better position to come and brief you on our position then.
We'll certainly look forward to that, because it will be groundbreaking. But let's also ask, is this another group you might be able to speak for, the host communities? What would be your advice to them? Because the majority seem to be saying that 3% is a slap in the face of host communities, especially the clause that seems to make host communities responsible for vandalized pipelines as a condition to their collecting the money allocated to them. What do you say to this, and what would be your advice to them by way of going about making their own views felt?
Well, first, I think we even need to commend those responsible, the drafters and the host communities and everybody who contributed to this process, for at least securing an acknowledgement that the host communities deserve to be looked after as far as this is concerned. And you will know that federal government has always been supportive of this. The derivation principle has come out of these struggles over the last 2 decades. The idea of NDDC came out of this struggle, for example. So the host community fund is also a very, very good idea. And there's a model, I think it is in Dorama, that bought the petrochemical industry in Port Harcourt. And one of the very, very laudable ideas that has come out of that is also a host community fund that is already operating and that is being managed by that community, the LMA community in Rivers State. And I think it's a model you might want to look at and that we might want to really use in putting the structure together. I am aware that many in the communities have said that this ought to be 5% rather than 3%. I really don't know what the technicalities of this will be, but the important thing is whatever it is, we should ensure that it is in the overall interest of the community. And it must be transparently run. It must be a fund that is accountable to the community in all of its ramifications, not just to the head of the communities or key players in the communities, but for the education, for healthcare, for investments in industry in the relevant communities that are affected by this.
Okay, and I just want to ask again, it may seem like I'm repeating myself, but how hopeful are we that the host communities will see an amendment, because this is what people are projecting to them, that it's possible that their concerns will be reflected in the amendments, such as the one you seek for the governors?
Well, Ekene, it's hope that brought us to this point. Hope is the only currency that we can spend when we are struggling for something. If we don't believe it's going to happen, then we might as well just resign to fate and then forget all about it. But you dream because you believe that something will come out of the dream. So hope is the currency. We have to spend it.
Okay. Okay, well, looking ahead then, if I may ask, because some have said that this act is the game changer in that corruption has centered around the oil industry. And if somehow this act can reflect the necessary transparency needed, then we might just shackle that beast called corruption. How, again, hopeful are you that this act could be the game changer?
Well, the devil is always in the detail. Anything that could help us stem the tide of corruption in our country should be encouraged and should be supported. You may know that governors have been at the forefront of Nigerians who are insisting that the cesspool of corruption that industry represents is also why the citizens are being shortchanged and why petroleum, particularly PMS, premium motor spirit, is being smuggled out of the country allegedly, and we're being forced to pay more than we ordinarily should pay. It is also why the refineries are not working. And these are things that we believe new investments in a clearly defined industry act and product sharing arrangements would enable the industry to work in the most efficient manner possible, rather than as a government, a state-owned enterprise that is neither accountable, but is opaque and very, very ill-transparent in its operations. If this act helps us to really address that fundamental challenge, everybody will be happy and Nigeria will be the better for it. But ultimately, I think this is an industry that we also need to focus on building an alternative to, rather than being over-dependent on. Enough of our dependence on the oil sector. And the change is happening, even if gradually.
Okay, and then when you speak of the people and their needs, where do you see subsidy playing into this act? I assume you've looked at this act, even if it's cursory glance. Where do you see the whole issue that concerns the man in the streets as regards subsidy playing out in this act? How soon might we feel the impact? Because we're told that we won't see the profit of this act till 2023.
Well, as I said, the devil is in the detail. This is a very comprehensive document. I can't tell you that I have read every single page of it, but what is important is that the implementation committee, chaired by my brother and friend, former Governor Timi Pre-Silva, should come out with a frequently asked questions on some of these issues that you have raised, that is intelligible, easy to break down to ordinary Nigerians, so that they really know what's going to be different with this Petroleum Industry Act. I hope that frequently asked questions can be produced and put on the website of the NNPC and website of the Ministry of Petroleum Resources and shared with all the critical stakeholders, so that everybody would know precisely, nuts and bolts, what this will represent for the industry.
Okay.
All right. So a couple of more questions for you, but are we defaulting to find fault? And I'm talking about the 50 million that was tagged on the amount that has been lost in the last 10 years. What do you have to say about this? Some people have to say about this.